Welcome to Echo Shade, where history whispers its darkest secrets and forgotten stories.
She was born Elisabeth Amalie Eugenie of Bavaria, yet the world would come to know her by a far more haunting name, Sissi, a woman painted in legends, sculpted in myths, and buried beneath layers of romanticized fantasies. But behind the portraits, the pearls, the impossible beauty, and the tragic glamour lies a truth far more unsettling and far more human. The true Sissi was not the fairy tale empress the world pretends she was. She was a rebel, a wanderer, a prisoner inside her own palace, a woman endlessly running from the court, from society, from her own reflection, and eventually from herself. The story begins long before the crown touched her head, long before Vienna whispered her name with awe. It begins in Bavaria, where a young girl lived in a world unshaped by etiquette, unpolished by expectation. Sissi grew up surrounded by open fields, mountain air, horses, freedom, everything the imperial world would later deny her. Unlike royal children raised under strict codes, Sissi was barefoot, wild, curious, and allowed to roam. She wrote poems, rode horses at dangerous speed, climbed trees, and kept diaries filled with childish philosophies about life and death. She was never meant to be empress. Hélène, her older sister, was. Hélène, the perfectly trained, dutiful, elegant daughter, the one destined for the Austrian throne. But destiny, as history has shown again and again, has its own preferences. And on the day the two sisters traveled to Bad Ischl for Helene's engagement, the future of Europe quietly shifted. Emperor Franz Joseph, the most powerful monarch of his age, entered the room expecting to meet his future bride. Instead, his eyes fell upon the shy, fragile 16-year-old girl standing beside her. Sissi wore no extravagant gown, no carefully applied cosmetics, no calculated charm. She was simply herself, nervous, slender, ethereal, with soft curls framing a face that would one day become an obsession for Europe. Franz Joseph did not just notice her. He became captivated. Historians often soften the truth, saying he fell in love. But the truth feels closer to fascination, an instantaneous enchantment that clouded logic. He broke protocol, ignored political expectations, and within hours he informed his mother, the powerful and controlling Archduchess Sophie, that he would marry Sissi instead. Sophie was stunned. She did not oppose because she disliked Sissi. She opposed because she could see what Franz could not. This girl was not made for the crown. She was too free, too emotional, too unpolished, too unwilling to submit. But the emperor insisted, and so a wedding was arranged. Grand, dazzling, and entirely suffocating. Sissi entered the Austrian court, like a bird being placed inside a gilded cage. The palace was magnificent but cold, filled with rules written in ink so old even the walls seemed weary. Every movement was measured, every breath monitored. Even her wardrobe belonged to tradition, not to her. She was judged for everything: how she walked, how she sat, how she ate, how she breathed. Archduchess Sophie took immediate control. She treated Sissi less like a future empress and more like a child needing discipline. Sissi's mother-in-law wrote letters complaining about her inexperience, her softness, her youth. She managed Sissi's schedule, restricted her access to Franz Joseph, and even took control of something far more sacred: her children. When Sissi gave birth to her first daughter, Sophie stepped in and declared herself responsible for the baby's upbringing. Sissi was allowed only limited visits. Since her grief turned into silent rebellion, she began shrinking into herself, hiding her emotions behind smiles that fooled no one. She sought freedom in the only ways she could. She retreated into intense physical discipline, riding horses with dangerous recklessness, walking for hours until her feet bled, and sleeping on hard mattresses. She developed an obsession with staying impossibly slim, following extreme diets and workouts long before they were medically understood. Her waist became a myth. reported to be only 18 inches, sometimes less. Her hair became a legend, so long it reached the floor, requiring hours of grooming each day. But all these routines were not vanity, they were control, a small rebellion in a life where every decision was made by someone else. Her beauty, ironically, became both her armor and her prison. The world admired her appearance, but no one saw the loneliness beneath it. Even today, tourists, films, and love stories idolize her image, yet forget that beneath the iconic photographs stood a woman trembling under the weight of expectation. Her marriage, too, was a paradox. Franz Joseph adored her, but he adored her as an ideal, not as the complex, wounded woman she was. He wanted her near yet understood her little. He could rule empires but could not navigate her soul. Their conversations were gentle but distant. Their emotional worlds rarely aligned. His loyalty was unwavering, but he also sought consolation in other women, most notably Katrina Schratt, a long-term companion encouraged by his own mother to ease the emperor's loneliness. Sissi tolerated it, even accepted it, not because she did not care, but because she had long given up on trying to own the life she had been thrust into. As years passed, Sissi drifted further away from the court. She became a wanderer, traveling across Europe, searching for the freedom she once knew as a girl. She visited Madeira, Corfu, Greece, Switzerland, always moving, always escaping. Her letters revealed a woman battling mental storms long before the modern world understood anxiety or depression. Her poetry spoke of despair, darkness, and a longing for death that haunted her for decades. She once wrote, "I fly from life until life flees from me." But history rarely sympathized with her. They called her eccentric. They called her vain. They called her elusive. They never called her what she truly was: human. Behind the famous portraits was a fragile soul who suffered in silence. Behind the grand titles was a girl who never wanted to be empress. Behind the beauty was a woman terrified of the world she was forced to rule. And destiny, it seems, had one last cruel chapter waiting for her. A chapter soaked in blood, wrapped in tragedy, and witnessed by a world that never truly understood her. The next poses how the walls finally began to press in, crushing every quiet piece of the woman the world calls Sissi. The weight of a crown she never wanted, Vienna celebrated her. Europe adored her. Poets worshipped her beauty. The press reimagined and reshaped her into a flawless myth. But Sissi herself felt nothing of the glory. Inside the Habsburg palace, the corridors echoed not with applause, but with whispers. Whispers about her inadequacy, her fragility, her failure to become the empress the empire demanded. Archduchess Sophie tightened her grip. She criticized every decision, every gesture, every moment of softness. The court compared Sissi with political expectations she never asked for and never understood. Her pregnancies came early and came painfully. Her first child was taken from her, literally removed from her arms by Archduchess Sophie. Her second daughter, Gisela, was raised the same way. When Sissi's third child, Crown Prince Rudolph, was born, she begged to be allowed to raise him herself. But Sophie insisted again, claiming Sissi was too immature, too unstable, too emotional to raise an heir to the empire. Sissi broke down. Letters from the time describe her trembling, crying behind closed doors, refusing meals, speaking only in whispers. Her loneliness became absolute. Her title gave her power over millions, but none over her own life. She began writing more poems, dark, shadowed, obsessively honest. She spoke of feeling like a ghost wandering through life unseen. She wrote that she felt like a statue carved for public display, admired but never embraced. The world saw an empress. She saw a stranger trapped in her own skin. Europe's obsession. The beautiful ghost by her early 20s, Sissi was already a European phenomenon. Artists painted her in silks and diamonds. Photographers raced for permission to capture her legendary profile. Political leaders spoke of her grace as a symbol of Austrian majesty. Women tried to imitate her fashion, her hair, her slender waist. The more beautiful she became, the more invisible she felt. She understood the paradox. People loved her image, not her. So she turned her beauty into a weapon. She honed it with discipline that bordered on brutal. She controlled her diet with surgical precision, often surviving on oranges, milk, or broth for days. She rode horses at speeds even men feared. Her waist training became a torture ritual she willingly endured. And her hair, her iconic floor-length hair, became a symbol of the image she hated but knew she needed. Hours upon hours were spent grooming it. If a hairdresser broke one strand, Sissi would refuse to speak to her for days. Not vanity, control, because control was the only thing she had left. The Greek escape. A rebellion in disguise at 27, Sissi discovered Greece, a land of myths, ruins, philosophy, everything she felt she had lost. She fell in love with the landscape, the silence, the sense of ancient sorrow lingering in its stones. Greece represented freedom. Austria represented suffocation. She began traveling more often, each journey longer than the one before. She used her failing health as an excuse, something that doctors quietly accepted, because her emotional pain manifested physically. Her lungs weakened. Her appetite ebbed. Her nerves shook. Her weight dropped so low that diplomats whispered she looked like a fading shadow. But the further she ran, the deeper she fell into herself. She wrote about wanting to disappear. She wrote about envying birds because they had wings. She wrote about envying the ocean because it had no boundaries. Her poetry wasn't simply melancholic, it was prophetic. Marriage in silence, Franz Joseph admired her, still adored her, but could not reach her anymore. He wrote letters full of warmth, and she answered them with distance. He sent gifts, and she replied with polite gratitude. He begged her to return to Vienna, and she returned only when duty forced her. Their marriage became a quiet coexistence. He ruled the empire. She roamed the world. He trusted her deeply. She trusted almost no one. And then came the moment that confirmed what she had already known. Franz Joseph had a long-term mistress, Katrina Schratt, a Viennese actress. The shocking part is not that Sissi was hurt. The shocking part is that she encouraged the relationship. She even gifted Schratt expensive jewelry. Why? Because Sissi no longer wanted the emotional expectations of a wife. She wanted fewer responsibilities, not more. She wanted Franz Joseph to be cared for, but not by her. She once wrote, "I am a ship that never finds harbor." Joseph's harbor was no longer Sissi, and she seemed relieved. The death of Sophie, the Empress, breaks completely in 1857. Sissi's 2 daughters accompanied her on a tour of Hungary. The royal family hoped the trip would strengthen loyalty from the Hungarian people, but tragedy waited. Her eldest daughter, Sophie, caught an illness, likely typhus, during the journey. Within days, the child grew weaker. Within hours, the fever rose. Within moments, Sissi watched her daughter take her final breath. She collapsed over the child's body, screaming, pleading, begging for her to wake up. Court letters describe her grief as unbearable, almost animalistic. She blamed herself. She blamed the journey. She blamed her inexperience. She blamed her entire life. The court blamed her too. Archduchess Sophie wrote in her diary that Sissi was responsible for the child's death. She had forced the trip, forced the exposure, forced the risk. Sissi never recovered from that guilt. From that day, the palace no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a tomb. The political rise she never wanted, ironically. Sissi's greatest period of political power came from her emotional suffering. After her daughter's death, she withdrew so deeply that the court feared losing her entirely. Franz Joseph gave her more freedom, more influence, hoping it would help. And strangely, when it came to politics, Sissi was brilliant. She understood people. She understood emotion. She understood desperation. She became the key figure behind the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, the agreement that gave Hungary autonomy under the empire. Sissi used her popularity among Hungarians to push the emperor toward a decision he had long avoided. The result changed Europe forever. And Hungary adored her for it. When she was crowned Queen of Hungary in Budapest, the crowd cheered so loudly the ground trembled. For the first time in years, Sissi felt something close to belonging. She later said it was the only moment she felt truly seen. But political victories did not heal her. They only brightened the mask she wore in public. Behind it, she remained fragile. A mother, haunted Crown Prince Rudolf, her beloved only son, became the center of her emotional world. He was intelligent, sensitive, rebellious, troubled, like her. She saw her own loneliness inside him, but Rudolf was also crushed by the same expectations she once faced. He was raised under harsh military discipline, forced into roles that suffocated him. Sissi warned Franz Joseph repeatedly, "This will break him." She was right. Rudolf would one day become the ghost that destroyed what remained of her heart. But that moment belongs to part 3. Now Sissi watched helplessly as her son spiraled, emotionally, politically, mentally, into the same darkness that followed her, and the Empress, who had already run from her own fate, suddenly realized she was watching the same cage being built around her son. The wanderer returns, but no matter how far she went, Greece, Madeira, England, Ireland, her sorrow traveled with her. She wrote poetry at night, walked miles alone, avoided mirrors because her beauty no longer comforted her, wore black more often than color, and spoke of herself as already dead long before fate finally caught her. The world admired her elegance. No one knew she was fading. Sissi was not living a royal dream. She was living a quiet tragedy, a tragedy that was about to grow darker, far more devastating, and forever bound to European history. If Sissi's life until now felt like a slow unraveling, then this chapter is where the thread snaps, not quietly, not gently, but with a violence that Europe never forgot. A son lost long before his death, Crown Prince Rudolf had inherited many things from his mother: intelligence, sensitivity, restlessness, melancholy. But these qualities, in a royal court drowning in tradition and military rigidity, were treated not as gifts, but as weaknesses. From childhood, Rudolf was suffocated by the same forces that once crushed Sissi. An unbending father, Franz Joseph, who believed discipline creates strength, a court that demanded conformity, a political environment filled with expectations, a society that mistrusted emotional depth. In men, Sissi recognized the signs because she lived them herself. She sensed the darkness building in her son long before others acknowledged it. She spoke to him gently, wrote him letters filled with warmth, tried to mend wounds no one else could see. But the palace trained him to hide everything. Hide his loneliness, hide his fear, hide his anxiety, hide his despair. And so he did. Behind the formal uniforms and rehearsed speeches was a man slowly drowning. He struggled with politics. He fought with his father. He isolated himself. He turned to alcohol and affairs. He confided in no one except his closest companions, and sometimes in Sissi herself. But their relationship was fragmented by physical distance. Sissi, ever wandering, was rarely in Vienna for long. She wrote letters to him from Greece, England, Ireland, Switzerland. Letters filled with tenderness and warnings. She urged him to hold on. She begged him to be patient. She tried to pull him back from the edge. But the edge was closer than anyone imagined. Mayerling, a night that changed history on January 30th, 1889. The Austrian Empire awoke to a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. Crown Prince Rudolf, heir to the Habsburg Dynasty, had been found dead in a hunting lodge at Mayerling, together with his young lover, Baroness Mary Wetzera. The official story declared it a suicide pact. The unofficial truths whispered much worse. He had shot her. Then he had shot himself. Or she had begged him to die with her. Or the Imperial Secret Police covered fragments no one was meant to see. Or the monarchy's survival required a version of the story that hid the true horror. But one thing is undeniable. Rudolf died in despair. A despair his mother had recognized but could not stop. When news reached Sissi, she collapsed. Witness accounts say she let out a scream so raw, so piercing, that servants froze in place. She fell to the ground. Her hair came undone. She trembled, unable to stand. Her breathing stopped and then came in gasps, again and again. My son? My poor, poor child. Something inside her broke permanently that day, not a fracture, a shattering. Sissi wore black from that moment until her death, and never again touching color. Her poetry grew darker, more fatalistic. Her letters turned into mourning rituals. She avoided public gatherings. She refused celebrations. She lost weight rapidly. Her face hollowed. Her eyes dimmed. Her voice softened into a whisper. Even Franz Joseph, who had endured war, rebellion, and political uprisings, was terrified by the transformation he saw in his wife. This was not grief. It was the death of her last reason to live. The Empress who became a shadow after Rudolf's death, Sissi withdrew completely from imperial court life. Her role became symbolic. Her presence became ethereal. She was no longer a queen, but a living ghost trapped inside her own legend. She traveled obsessively, searching for a place where her grief would hurt less. She wandered through the shores of Corfu, the mountains of Switzerland, the forests of Bavaria, the quiet towns of Ireland, the fog, covered gardens of England. Everywhere she went. She walked for hours, sometimes all day, refusing carriages, refusing shelter, refusing comfort. Her ladies-in-waiting often found her standing alone at cliffs, staring into the emptiness for so long they feared she might jump. She didn't jump. But she didn't return to life either. Instead, she turned inward, locking her emotions behind walls so high no one could reach her. She wrote in her journal, "I live in the world, but I do not belong to it. My soul died with my son. I walk, and I walk, and I walk, hoping my sorrow will tire before I do." She refused to sit for portraits. She covered her face with fans, veils, umbrellas. She no longer wanted the world to see her beauty, because beauty had betrayed her. She once said, "If they cannot see my pain, they do not deserve to see my face." Her husband left behind Franz Joseph adored her until his final breath, quietly, patiently, respectfully. He sent letters begging her to return. He offered her anything she desired. He promised to change the court rules. He promised to give her more freedom. He promised to be a better husband. But Sissi had slipped into a world beyond promises. She visited him occasionally, offering polite affection but no closeness. Their marriage was no longer a union, only a memory. And Franz Joseph suffered quietly. He had lost his son. He had lost the warmth of his wife. He had lost the world he had tried so hard to control, but he accepted it. Because he understood that Sissi was not running from him. She was running from her grief. A woman obsessed with fate, Rudolf's death awakened something fatalistic in Sissi. She became convinced that her final years would be short, that something violent would claim her life. She began speaking of death openly, not with fear, but with longing. She subscribed to spiritual theories, prophecies, poets who wrote about existential sorrow. She read dark philosophy. She quoted Greek tragedies. She compared herself to Iphigenia, trapped in a destiny written long before she was born. Her staff recorded her saying, "Death follows me. It stands behind me like a silent shadow. I am waiting for the blow. May it come quickly." She stopped eating properly. She refused medical help. She kept her body thin to the point of fragility. She wrote poems imagining her own funeral. She wandered without guards, despite warnings that it was unsafe. When her daughter Valerie begged her for caution, she simply answered, "What can the world do to me that it has not done already?" She was no longer afraid of death. She was expecting it, inviting it, and fate accepted her invitation. The world moves on, but Sissi cannot Austria continued as usual. Europe celebrated its emperors, queens, and future kings. The Habsburg court planned events, ceremonies, diplomatic marriages, but Sissi drifted further into her own shadow world. The press began calling her the sorrowful empress. Writers described her as a spirit wandering in human form. Citizens whispered that she had the eyes of a woman who had already died. Those who saw her during this period described her as almost weightless, pale as marble, beautiful, but hauntingly so, a woman carrying centuries of sadness in her eyes. And she walked as if she were searching for an exit, not from the palace, but from life. Her destiny, long foretold in the darkness of her own poetry, was approaching, silently, steadily, unstoppably. And when death finally came for her, she welcomed it like an old friend. There are women whose lives end, and there are women whose lives turn into myths the moment they take their final breath. Empress Elisabeth, Sissi, did not die as a queen. She died as a wanderer, as a fugitive from her own sorrow, as a woman who had predicted her fate in poems long before the world understood them. Her story ends not in Vienna, not in a palace, not surrounded by royalty, but on a quiet lakeside street in Geneva. But before that final moment, her last years unfolded like the fading chapters of a Gothic novel. A queen who no longer wanted to be seen after Rudolph's death, Sissi embraced invisibility. She traveled constantly. Her luggage remained forever packed. Her ladies-in-waiting lived in a state of permanent exhaustion. She refused public attention and hid her face behind thick black veils, lace parasols, and fans that never left her hands. Her dresses were almost always black, her footsteps light, her presence ghostly. People who encountered her described her as a shadow in human form, a figure of unbearable sorrow, a beautiful apparition. Her grief had reshaped her physically. She no longer resembled the iconic portraits that made her Europe's favorite empress. But Sissi did not care. She no longer wanted the world to adore her beauty. She wanted the world to forget she existed. The final wanderings in her last years, her restlessness reached its peak. She drifted through Switzerland, France, England, Venice, Corfu, Bavaria, Ireland, everywhere she went. She walked for hours, fast, relentless, unstoppable. She climbed mountains with the stamina of a soldier. She outpaced her staff daily. Her body, despite being thin and fragile, moved as if it were trying to outrun fate. She wrote lines in her diary that terrified even those who had grown accustomed to her darkness. I want to vanish. I want to vanish. I'll let death take me by surprise. And my heart has stopped beating. I only breathe because I must. These were not metaphors. These were confessions. Prophecies and the feeling of being followed, Sissi developed an obsession with omens. She met clairvoyants, read ancient mystical texts, and believed wholeheartedly that her death was approaching. She told her attendants repeatedly, I will die suddenly. There will be no warning. She believed assassination was her destiny. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't fear. It was acceptance. She welcomed the idea of death so calmly that her staff started avoiding the subject entirely. She once said to her lady-in-waiting, "Do not worry. When the moment comes, I will be ready." September 10th, 1898. Geneva was peaceful that morning. A soft breeze touched the lake. People strolled along the waterfront. No one expected history to appear on that quiet path. Sissi arrived under a false name, a Countess of Hohenheim-Zu, the alias she used during her travels to avoid attention. She wore a black dress, black gloves, a black veil. Her waist was still impossibly thin. Her parasol still shielded her face. She looked like a wealthy widow, not an empress. The world did not recognize her. But one man did. Luigi Lucchini, the man waiting in the shadows. Zucchini was an Italian anarchist, a man who hated the monarchy, a man who believed killing a royal would send a message to Europe. He did not know which royal he would kill. He only knew he needed a target. When he heard that an Empress was staying in Geneva, he made his choice. He fashioned his weapon himself. Not a gun, not a dagger, not a sword, but a rough file sharpened into a stiletto. A makeshift spike designed to pierce just once. He waited, watched, followed, and when Sissi began walking toward the steamship, unaware of the man behind her, fate took its final step. The assassination of Sissi and her lady-in-waiting walked down the pier. Lucchini moved quickly. He approached her from the front. No one noticed. He looked like just another man in the crowd. Then, suddenly, he lunged. He struck Sissi hard in the chest with the sharpened file. The blow was quick, almost invisible. To onlookers, it looked like he merely pushed her aside. Sissi fell to the ground. Her parasol dropped. Her hat slipped. Her veil fluttered. Her lady-in-waiting helped her up immediately. Sissi whispered, "It is nothing. He pushed me. That is all." She insisted on boarding the ship. No one saw the blood yet. No one realized the weapon had pierced her heart. They entered the boat. She walked a few steps, then collapsed. Her lady-in-waiting loosened her corset and saw the truth. A small dark hole in her chest, blood spreading. The Empress removed her glove, saw blood on her hand, and whispered, "I am dying." Jen screamed. She didn't panic. She simply closed her eyes. The final moments she was carried back to her hotel. Doctors were summoned but could do nothing. The Empress, known for her beauty, her grief, her restlessness, died quietly within minutes. Her final words reportedly were, "Do not tell the Emperor." Even in her final breath, she worried about Franz Joseph's heartbreak. When he received the news in Vienna, he said, "She will never know how much I loved her." A queen-turned-legend Europe was stunned. A queen assassinated not in war, not in rebellion, not in palace intrigue, but by a wandering anarchist with a handmade weapon. Sissi's death became the final chapter in a life shaped by sorrow. Her legacy transformed instantly. From a restless empress to a tragic heroine, from a misunderstood queen to a mythical icon in death. Everything she had run from became immortal. Her beauty, her loneliness, her elegance, her darkness, her rebellion, her sorrow. Sissi became eternal. The truth behind the legend, the world remembers her for her fashion, her hair, her waist, her beauty. But her true story, the story you have now unmasked, is far more haunting. She was a woman trapped in a life she never chose. A mother who lost her child. A queen who felt like a prisoner. A wanderer searching for freedom that never came. A soul who longed for death long before it arrived. Her assassination was not just an act of violence. It was the final sentence of a destiny she had sensed her entire life. Sissi once wrote, "Note, I feel as though I walk beside my own grave." In the end, she didn't walk beside it. She walked straight into it. The quiet dignity of a woman who had suffered enough